Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Hope you're enjoying your Sunday. I want to give you a rundown of the week ahead in the market and give you my thoughts on the overall structure of everything that's going on with the S&P 500, the Nasdaq. Then I'm going to give you a bunch of really high quality setups, some different trades that I'm looking at on specific stocks. So let's just hop right into it. I'm going to give you my thoughts here. So SPY is at a really key inflection point. We've had a breakdown of this lower trend line. As you can see here, we've had multiple reactions. We ultimately broke lower in early March, and then we bottomed on March 13th. Now we are trying to retest that breakdown. So usually when you have a break of trend, price will like to move back and retest that level, and that's what's been happening over the last couple days. We failed so far to reclaim that trend, and I'm going to explain to you why and give you the more specific details of why I think we actually will reclaim that trend over the course of this video. But typically, if you do have a false breakdown, right? So we had a breakdown and we reclaim the trend, there will be an equal and opposite reaction on price. And we'll have a really strong push to the upside. There's a bunch of gaps around like 580 and then even potentially back up to 600 on SPY. And the reason I think that, and what better way than just showing you on recent price history, you can see that we had this trend line and this trend line, and we were forming somewhat of a consolidation level back from like the FOMC in December. So we had these multiple reactions. We were consolidating in this range, and then ultimately you can see here we did break that trend line lower. So we broke the wedge lower and we bounced off this lower trend line, and then ultimately we reclaimed that breakdown. And once we reclaimed that breakdown, you can see that we had this really strong push through the wedge, and then we broke to the upside of that wedge and actually made new all-time highs. And so as you can see, whenever you have that false breakdown, bears are losing and bulls really step up, show up, and then there's this really strong push to the upside. And so I do think that this can happen again if we reclaim the trend. And what better way to play a position if you're just playing SPY? You can play SPY calls to the upside, 575, 580, 600 over the next 1 to 3 weeks. If this move happens, it will happen quick. Then you can just set up a stop loss below the trend line. If we reject and then close back under, then there's a high percentage chance that we'll continue lower to that trend line that we have not tested yet, right? So we have this longer term trend line. I think at some point we will retest that trend. It just might happen a bit later in the market. You know, we might bounce and then head lower, or we'll reject here and head lower. But that's the best high quality setup. Go long if we break over here. Otherwise, just kind of wait, see how things happen, and then play calls to the upside once we retest that trend line, because that's a strong level of support. And then same thing here with tech. You know, we broke down the lower trend. We're going to see if we can reclaim that, and I'll explain why I think we will here in a moment. But here's the Russell. This 2100 level has been a key level of resistance. Seems like we've made this new low. We're trying to see if we can break back over this trend. And then same thing here with Dow. We actually did break below this trend line, and we are breaking out of that downtrend. So the Dow is a bit stronger than the others. Hopefully it's leading, and then you'll have the S&P 500 as well as tech start to push as well. But let's take a deeper dive into SPY. This is the ETF for the S&P 500. You can see that we've been forming somewhat of this broadening wedge. So we have a lower low here, but then we push to the upside, and then, you know, we have lower lows and higher highs. So we're forming somewhat of this broadening wedge. We have two bear gaps. So we have this bear gap and this bear gap. And a bear gap is really just when there's a gap down on the daily. So you have this gap in price that hasn't been filled in with any volume. And those levels will act as resistance. So whenever you have a gap down, if we push back up to that gap, it will act as resistance. But we also do have a bull gap here that was formed back after we hit the lows on March 13th. And this level is going to act as support. So you have support here, and then you have resistance and resistance here as well. So What we had recently, though, if we just dig a little bit deeper into the most recent price action, is you can see that this is Thursday, and then this is Friday's price action. And you can see that we actually had a gap down on Thursday, and bulls really just pushed this back, filled the gap, and then pushed back over to this resistance gap that we have here, this original bear gap. And then same thing on Friday. We had this really strong gap down, but then you can see that price just trended higher, and we filled the gap and actually closed above the gap. So the most recent price action, bulls have been taking control during the intraday movement, right? So I think that bulls, although we're still in a bearish structure because we're still under that green trend line, as you can see here, this is what this is pointing to, this arrow. But if we can reclaim that trend, get over 568, 569, start filling in these bear gaps, then we're going to have a really strong push to the upside. I think that it's very likely, because we're in a broadening wedge, that we can reclaim this trend, push up to this trend. This might act as some level of resistance, and then hopefully we can hold like this 573 support as support, and then try to go up and fill that gap. Now, from there, I'll have to kind of figure out what else is going on in the markets, but at least short term, I do think that that is a very strong possibility. We still have tariffs going online in April, but Trump has already kind of walked it back and said maybe he'll be a bit more flexible. So right now, I think that the tariff trade war narrative is starting to become a bit more stale. It's not having as much of an influence on intraday price action just because Trump has been saying it for weeks now. So I think that that has been digested, and maybe even though we'll have some more tariff headlines in the future, that this will be bought up. And that was the case back in other trade wars. We usually have a really strong push down in over like a week, and then we have a strong bounce, and then maybe another retest, and then ultimately we push higher in the markets. Obviously, a recession risk is still at play and all of those things, but we really just need to see what GDP is this week. So on the calendar, we do have GDP growth on Thursday. So if that's negative, we could see a bit of a sell on Thursday. So there's like a few things to just be worried about over the next couple days as that data comes out. But nonetheless, because the recent price action has been bullish, as well as here on the daily, you can see that I was calling for this capitulation event. We didn't quite hit the trend line. We didn't have really strong down volume. We actually had really two strong days of up volume, over 90% and then 80% back to back. So bulls are really stepping in here. We just need to see if we can reclaim that trend, and then we're going to be off to the races. But if not, we're going to head lower, have the stop loss, test the trend line, and then just play the bounce there once we fill this gap. So that's really what I'm looking for on the market. A few really interesting setups that I'm looking at right now, high quality ones. This one's AMD. You can see that we had this really clean trend line, and we actually broke above that. I'm currently in calls, posted this one in the Discord. Over the next couple weeks, I do think this continue higher. We might have like somewhat of a retest of this trend line, but ultimately I think this is going to push towards this 113 level. That's going to be our first level that we're looking to take profit. Hopefully that can break over and push to 122, but I'm going to really be looking at that trend line, right? If the market can break over that and hold, then I might stay in AMD a bit longer. Otherwise, I'm looking to take profit around 113. Amazon, somewhat of a similar setup. You can see that we had that breakdown under 213 from that lower trend. We've came back down, tested this 188, 189 level as support. That was like a previous bull gap that we had. And usually when you fill a bull gap, you'll have a reversal. Really with any gap, you always have a reversal on price. So we came back down, and that's acting as support. So if this one can push back up, break this sneaky little trend line here, then we'll probably push to 201 and then even potentially break back over. Also line that up with SPY and QQQ. And then lastly, we'll just take a look at NVIDIA. This one's kind of in an interesting spot. We had a breakdown on that upper trend line, or this uptrend. We did have a breakdown. Now because we've come down, came back up, you can see it retested that level and rejected so far. So this one's not in as good of a position. I'd be looking to actually play this short, but it really just depends on the market. If the market rolls over, then this will likely roll over back to that 101, 102 level. So that's what I'm really looking for on the market for this week. Still a lot of traps, but if we can reclaim that trend, we are going to push in the markets. And then one last thing I'll leave you with. This is more of, I guess, kind of like seeing shapes in clouds, but Squeeze Metrics, they do publish gamma for the S&P 500. And as you can see here, when gamma flips negative, usually that marks a bottom, or at least a local bottom on SPY. And you can see that gamma came down. This is the yellow line. Came down, it hit a low, and then the green line, which is the S&P 500, it found the bottom and kept bouncing. Same thing here, and then back on March 13th, the most recent green circles you see here, gamma was actually at its lowest point, and we have been bouncing since then. So obviously this could still go back lower, SPY would follow, but ultimately I do think that we are somewhat near a local bottom in the market, and there will be a relief rally. Make sure you join the Discord if you're interested in just seeing all the different trade setups and plays. I post them all here, and we just got a bunch of people in here chatting on the regular, just sharing good ideas. So hope you enjoyed this video. Stay safe out there. I'll be posting in Discord, and I'll see you in the next video, guys. Peace.